Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Alhamdulillah kita mengatur setinggi kesyukuran kepada Allah SWT yang dapat bersama-sama pada petang ini menyelenggarakan Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2023. Saya lulukan kehadiran Yang Mulia Tunku Ali Zahuddin, Tan Sri Azlan, Datuk Amirul Faisal dan semua tetamu yang kalau ikut protokol banyak lagi kena baca. Tapi oleh kerana sudah diumumkan sebelum ini, saya akan terus dengan menyatakan penghargaan dan pandangan kepada rakan-rakan yang saya muliakan. Board members of Khazanah National Berhad, and ladies and gentlemen, well, you will listen to experts, projections, challenges, and of course megatrends. Impressive terms, and I must confess that I've not been given adequate summary of what transpired in the last 2 days or sessions that you had from this morning. Unlike most politicians who claim to have been briefed, I have not been briefed today. But let me give you a different perspective. Last few days, I attended or visited the exhibition on post-normal times. I hope it has some bearing to what issues that we have to deliberate upon. Where we are dealing with the situation, unprecedented, what's termed as facing and having to deal with issues of chaos and contradictions. What Ban Ki-moon referred to, the issue of spontaneity, the turbulence and the issues faced by the global community has somewhat been unprecedented. It is chaotic, and it is simultaneous. You talk about migration, you talk about civil wars, you can talk about climate crises, you talk about COVID-19, or now even post-COVID-19. You talk about the aftermath and ramifications due to the Ukraine-Russian war. Of course, it's unprecedented. The best brains, the best minds were not able to anticipate the gravity, the chaos, the contradictions, and the simultaneous challenges happening all at the same time. It requires, of course, humility on the part of the elites, who at times feel so certain about what they can anticipate for the future. It requires us to reflect and understand that whilst we can plan ahead, but the future is in the realm of the unknown. So there is, of course, relevance for sessions and conversations such as this, talking about megatrends and what you can anticipate to the best of our ability, and having to reflect and analyze and assess on a daily basis. And that I'm just reflecting the challenges that I have to face and the government of today. Of course, Malaysia is more complex in that sense. We inherit 1.5 trillion debt. We are in a deficit, facing a deficit 5.6, which have to be dealt with. This is not normal. It is enough to say that we are living in the post-normal times, but it's exacerbated by this sort of, should I say, carelessness or poor governance that have led us to this state of affairs. That is why I have consistently called upon leaders, political professionals, those in the JICs, in government, public servants, to focus on the issue of the central issue of governance. Because with all the resources that we have, if we do manage the economy well and plan ahead and have the resolve, the tenacity to deal with these problems with a clarity of policies, I'm rather more optimistic on the outcome for the future. You see, I'm ignoring my text because after listening to the synopsis, I don't want to be deemed completely irrelevant. So my central thesis in this government is, number one, to acknowledge that we have encountered these difficulties due to poor governance and endemic corruption. And if we do accept that, then we should be able to have this greater sense of confidence to forge ahead, number one, with clarity of policies. We have the Madani economy, we have the energy transition, followed by the new industrial master plan, and even in our midterm review of the 12th Malaysia plan, we have departed from the traditional way or manner of reviewing plans, but to make shifts and adjustments considering the challenges that we face at present. So clarity of policies is important to generate confidence. I think before you talk about foreign investors or even domestic investors, I think confidence in the general public, because there is a trust deficit among not only political leaders, but elites in general. Policies that have been carved out to benefit the elites at the expense of the majority of our population. So this shift in governance and the attitude is, to me, critical. I've always accepted the notion that the resistance to change is not necessarily by the poor, uneducated masses. Resistance to change oftentimes is from the elites, who are used to the norm, either through abuse of power and position or corruption or just standard practice, to what we consider as the necessary changes, either policy shift or paradigm shift. Even for those among the elites who have been harping on the issue of paradigm shift, has not actually moved according to what Thomas Kuhn referred to as paradigm shift, because what did happen is some adjustments, minor adjustments. IT is an example, on should I say more sophisticated manner of practice in terms of management, both in government and in the private sector. But what we mean by paradigm shift is probably to acknowledge the limitations of the past and take a new course, policies and ways of doing things that is critical to move up society. It's the same like Schumpeter's gale of creative destruction. You have to accept that the center cannot hold, things fall apart. W.B. Yeats. But things fall apart because of some fundamental flaws in the system. And therefore, there must be a preparedness to shift, formulate new policies, and to part from the past manner of doing things. That's why you talk about gale of creative destruction from the past flaws. That's why I think in our Madani philosophy, we are prepared, we have focused on the issue of the need to challenge Malaysians generally to accept some stark new realities. The race card, religious bigotry that has been part of the national narrative for decades has to end. And whilst we are proud, and I am too, am proud as a Malay in my culture, my civilization, and as a Muslim, a practicing Muslim who believes strongly in the ideals and what Islam has to contribute to international society, but it cannot be a blinkered view of ignoring the importance of the role of other races and other religions in this country. There's no way, no two-way about it. There's no compromise insofar as ensuring that this country, for the future, has to deal with policies that will deal with fundamental issues and problems in the society. Poverty, regardless of race. The vast majority are the Malays. We have to recognize this fact, which means all this talk about new economic policy, the focus on the so-called Malay survival, whilst has improved in terms of social mobility, undeniably so, through education opportunities, but has failed miserably because it has been used and abused to benefit a small coterie of individuals linked to the political elites. And this must end. So the new policy, for example, has to be courageous enough to state the fact that we have to deal with the problem of poverty, which means all the new policy directions cannot continue whilst ignoring this basic fact that you cannot allow Malaysia to succeed and continue to grow, robust growth, yes, we need, but it cannot allow for tolerance of abject poverty, of gross inequality. And naturally, majority of the Malays would benefit, but you cannot ignore the pockets of the poor among the indigenous tribes in Sabah, Sarawak, Chinese in the urban areas, or more so, the Indians. And I've said this publicly, I think probably the first Malay leader that had the courage to say in Parliament that the majority of the poor are Malays, but the poorest of the poor in Peninsula are the ethnic Indians. It is better that we deal with this situation frankly and openly and transparently in order to be able and persuade the masses to understand why there must be a genuine policy shift from what I consider as obsolete policies to be focused entirely on the issue of race. Having said that, if we want the government, for example, to make that shift, the private sector, including the non-Malays, must also acknowledge this fact and shift radically from this race notion, because the race trend or the race card is not necessarily from those in the political arena among the Malays, but also from the ethnic non-Malays. I've been appealing to them to showcase that while there is this shift in government policy, there must be also a shift among our friends and colleagues, among the non-Malays, to be trusted by the majority of the Malays that there is no longer the siege mentality or feeling of insecurity because of the tendency to ignore the plight of the poor, more so among the Malays. That is insofar as the race and religious card is concerned. But in terms of economic policies, I've said that we are living in probably in a very competitive world. People ask me, but even in New York recently, thank you all this Khazanah and Bursa and SC and the rest have been very, very supportive, organized excellent programs, and we can see the sense of enthusiasm from US industries and earlier from China. But we make it very clear that in order to forge ahead, we must make all the necessary measures. Either you call it incentives. I always make, I'm a bit cynical this term. I used to say, particularly when I was in the opposition, that when you help the poor, you call it subsidy. When you help the rich, you call it incentive. Actually, it means about the same thing. So I think you should be mindful of that. But we do require this sort of support to encourage more investments into this country. I'm grateful and thankful to the colleagues here who worked incredibly hard to convince investors. And in the last few months, you have seen this phenomenal increase and growth in interest. In Penuh, for example, the largest single investment outside Germany will be in Malaysia, 5 billion euros. Geely coming very soon. Although they made some commitments earlier, Geely Proton, but they have now decided and had the approval to proceed with the 10 billion ringgit expansion of the automobile city in Tanjung Malim. And of course, you have AWS, you have Elon Musk, and a number of new investments from China. Tomorrow night, I'll be leaving for Abu Dhabi for a day. They think I'm about 35 years old. I can travel to Abu Dhabi and come back the following day. And in the next few days, you will hear, inshallah, very great news from UAE in terms of their decision to focus on Malaysia and make Malaysia as the hub for major Arab investment in the region. Now, this is precisely so because of clarity of policy. No, I say clarity of policies, and concern for some of the issues, including the environment, gender participation, elevating the plight of the poor. All the issues must be seen, acted upon by all parties in this country. Now, the only problem we have to grapple with is the issue of ease of doing business. We have been struggling to make sure that the bureaucratic encumbrances must end. We have MAIDA, coordinated by MITI, but we have still problem in the state government and the local councils. Notwithstanding what have been said, there is still that problem we have to grapple with. And the cabinet has consistently discussed and acted upon this. And it's interesting that in tomorrow's cabinet, for the first time, I've asked a report on the status of select, say, 5, 6 companies, and to see when was the application, approval in principle, the umpteen departments they have got to go through for approvals, the time taken, the reason given, and the final approval. Because no amount of assurance would satisfy investors until we are able to effectively act upon their concerns, reasonable concerns. Of course, we are not going to compromise on the individual the issue of environmental impact. We're not going to compromise on our stated policies, but there is no reason to continue doing business, despite all the talk about economic policies and Madani and transparency and what have you, and still having to wait 2 years for EIA approval, 6 months for other approvals. Now, so you continue to talk about Megatrends. I support that. I want to share with you some of the concerns here, because as I said, notwithstanding what I have said in this actually discussion, not a speech, I would suggest that you also take into consideration the issues at hand and the uncertainties that we have to face, including the issues which I have alluded to earlier at the beginning of my speech on chaos, contradiction, and also the problem how to grapple with all the issues coming all at the same time, this simultaneity. We should just have said simultaneous, but you know, intellectuals have this penchant for difficult words to impress the public. So we use simultaneity from the word simultaneous. Good. So thank you very much, colleagues in Khazanah in particular. And I've decided, frankly, I mean, we have worked on the text, but I thought what I'm going to say is completely out of sync with the summary. But the lady, I hold you responsible for ignoring my text. So again, terima kasih banyak kepada Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2023.